stop it there and then I'll get set up. Hi, I'm Wayne. In my last video, you saw us building the brew stand, which we have before us right here. And today we're going to press this into service. So we're going to see how well it works. I'm taking a bit of a chance. This is my first all-grain batch of beer, and I'm actually videotaping it for YouTube, so I certainly hope it works out. Over here, we have most of our ingredients ready for our all-grain batch. Down here, we have 20 pounds of grain. This is malted barley. It's already been cracked. We're making a 10-gallon batch today, so that's what it requires. We have individual bags of hops. These are sealed for freshness. Really good stuff there. A few bags we're going to use to contain the hops in the boil to try and keep things neat. These are our carboys, or the vessels that we'll use for the fermentation at the very end of the process, and I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. And over here, and on the equipment side, we've got, this is a work chiller, and I'll explain this again in a minute, but this will go in at the end to cool things down. A brief overview of the process for the uninitiated. This is my hot liquor tank. We'll start out with our water in this container, and just water only. We'll heat this to around 180 degrees. That water, once it's hot, will be transferred here into the cooler. This is the mash-tun, and this is where the grain will rest for about an hour. While that grain is resting at 152 degrees, you want to hold it at that temperature. The starch in the grain is converted to sugar. That's what makes the fermentable, that's the fermentable sugar that the yeast work on to actually make the beer. I'll show you. On the inside of the mash tun, there's a manifold, and this is just a copper manifold system with slots cut in it that will allow you to drain that sweet liquor off of the grain bed. On top of that will sit sparge arm, and what this does is the hot water from the hot liquor tank will pass through this sparge arm, and we'll show you that later. But that'll sprinkle over the grain bed and then allow us to drain that sweet liquor off the bottom of the mash tun. From the mash tun, we go to the brew kettle, and here's where we collect all that, all those sugars and everything that we've accumulated in the mash tun. Once we've got that up to its proper volume, we'll start the boil. That's when you add your hops, and that's when a lot of the flavoring in the beer begins. So that's just kind of a quick overview, and in the next few shots, you'll see this actually at work. This can be a little tricky sometimes too. Well, you got to get all the burners.
Oh, all right. I thought it was you didn't later.
All right, we've heated our strike water here to 180 degrees, which is our target. And the next step is we're going to draw off a little bit of this hot water and preheat the mash tun. The manifold in here is copper, like I showed you before, and the cooler itself is a little bit cool. Because we want to hold that heat in, it's best to warm it up ahead of time. You want to do this very carefully as well, because this is very hot water. Now we're preparing for the mash. That's where we actually mix the hot water and the grains. We'll do that by adding 5 gallons of hot water to our mash-tun and stirring in the grain once we've done that. We add the grains to the hot stand water. You want to be careful to avoid any clumping or dry spots in the grain. All right, now we've got the 22 pounds of grain in here, including the specialty malts. We've added nearly 6 gallons of water at about 180 degrees. The hope is that we level off, or that this stabilizes at 152.
Yeah, go ahead.
Since we want to stabilize the temperature at 152, or a little bit higher than that, you just stir it up and cool it off. The mash is now rested for an hour at 152 degrees, and we're ready to start the sparge, which is rinsing the grain, getting all that sweet liquor into your brew pot. The first thing you want to do is draw off about 1 quart of the first runnings till they run clear. All right, that goes back in on top of your grain bed. Now we've got 170 degree sparge water here, which we're going to use to rinse the grains. We've installed our sparge arm assembly, which is pretty much a sprinkler head. And the idea is to try and match the flow coming into the container with the flow going out.
Yeah, that looks good.
This way. There we go. None spilling out. You can just crack that valve a little bit. We finished with our sparge, or the lautering, rinsing of the grains. You can get a better idea what the sparge arm looks like here too. And that's the basically the spent grain. So that's all been rinsed through, and hopefully we got every bit of goodness out of that we can. The brew pot is full. We got the heat on the boil. And the next step will be adding the hops.
Right.
All right, we're about 40 minutes into the boil right now. We've got our initial hops in there that have been in there since the kettle started boiling. This is the second edition hops. We've got Amarillo, 2 ounces of Amarillo hops for the last 20 minutes. That's going to add flavoring to the beer. All right, with 15 minutes left on the boil, we're going to add the wort chiller to the brew pot. You put it in the last 15 minutes to sanitize the coil. This is going to be used to cool the wort later by running cold water through it, but by adding it now, it cleans it up.
They're telling me I'll probably get going on 88 and have to just pull over and throw a hole.
All right, we've got the boil is complete. We've got the last hop addition in there, and now we've got the wort chiller in place in here. The coil's in place, and we have cold water running in from the garden hose through the coil and out through this line to bring the heat down to a temperature where we can pitch the yeast. Okay, we're getting down close to the end here. The wort is just about chilled enough that we can add it to the carboys and pitch the yeast. This is a yeast starter that I made from the White Labs California ale yeast. 6 cups of water and a cup and a cup and a half of dried malt extract. So this has been working for about a day and a half, and this will give the yeast a good head start when the wort gets added. we've added the yeast to the yeast slurry to the carboys, and now it's time to fill away. The temperature on the wort has gotten below 100 down to 90. We're right where we need to be.
Sort of the ring, top, bottom of that, right there.
Yep.
It's like caramel almost.
Mm-hmm.
See, there's still a lot of stuff.
I have to scoop the stuff out of it. I put the sieve fits in my funnel, and I have to scoop the hop residue out of it in order to get it all through.
Really?
You know, the foam can come out. Yeah, I don't care. The foam doesn't matter. Okay, the last step in the process, just about complete. We've got our wort and our yeast in the carboy. I've affixed a blow-off hose, just simply a stopper in the top and a hose that goes into a container of water here to use to keep it sanitary. I like to cover my carboy in a t-shirt so that any ambient sunlight doesn't get on the carboy while the beer is brewing, and that keeps it just about the right temperature. And of course, the most important thing you have to do when you're making homebrew is to have a homebrew.